My fiancé kept pressuring me to sign a prenup just in case, so I had my lawyer add a clause he definitely didn't read. When Garrett first brought up the prenup 6 months before our wedding, I wasn't suspicious. He was a successful architect, and I understood wanting to protect his assets. "It's just standard practice," he said, sliding the papers across our kitchen table. "My business partner insists all the guys do this." But then he started getting weird about it. Every few days, he'd casually mention how important it was that we get this handled soon. When I suggested we both hire separate lawyers to review it properly, he waved me off. "Mine already took care of everything. We just need your signature." The document was 47 pages of dense legal language that essentially said if we divorced, I'd get nothing. No alimony, no claim to property acquired during marriage, no retirement benefits. Even gifts I'd received would revert to him. "This seems pretty one-sided," I told him. Garrett's jaw tightened. "Do you want to marry me or not?" Red flag number 1. When I insisted on having my own attorney review it, he exploded. "You don't trust me? After 3 years together?" Then came the guilt trips about wedding costs and how stressed he was about his big project. Red flag number 2. My lawyer Patricia was horrified by the prenup's terms. "This is financial abuse in legal form," she said. "But if you're determined to sign, let me add some protections." We crafted additional clauses buried in the middle of the document. Standard legal language about asset disclosure, property valuations, and mandatory mediation. Nothing that would raise eyebrows during a quick scan, including one very special provision. The day I brought the revised prenup home, Garrett barely glanced at it before signing. "Finally," he muttered. "Now we can focus on important things." 2 weeks later, I discovered what those important things were. His phone buzzed during dinner. The text preview showed, "Can't wait for our trip to Cabo after your wedding. Love you." From someone named Ivy. I waited until he showered, then scrolled through months of messages. Garrett had been planning his honeymoon in Mexico with his girlfriend of 8 months. They'd booked adjoining hotel rooms and discussed how long he'd need to stay married to me before filing for divorce. "She's loaded," one message read. "This prenup guarantees I'll get half of everything when we split." Except Garrett had signed without reading Patricia's additions, including the clause specifying that any party who commits adultery during the engagement or marriage forfeits all rights to marital property and owes the faithful spouse $500,000 in damages. I printed everything. The next morning, I called Patricia. "Execute the adultery clause. I have documentation." Garrett's face when the process server arrived was worth every penny of Patricia's fees. The legal papers outlined his infidelity, his planned fraud, and his new financial obligations. "You can't do this," he stammered, scanning the documents frantically. "Actually, I can. Check page 23 of your prenup, the part you didn't read." His business partner's office called that afternoon, terminating their partnership. Apparently, Garrett's standard practice prenup advice wasn't company policy. It was his personal recommendation to help his buddies scam their fiancés. Ivy dumped him when she learned about the $500,000 judgment. Last month, I used the settlement money for a down payment on my dream house. Garrett's working at Home Depot now, but that wasn't the end of it. 3 weeks after the process server delivered Garrett's judgment papers, my phone started ringing. The first call came at 6:47 a.m. "Is this Melanie?" The voice was shaky. "Young. Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Chloe. I saw the news article about your fiancé. About the prenup thing." She paused. "I think he did the same thing to my sister." I sat up in bed. "What do you mean? Garrett Pembroke, right? Tall, dark hair, works in architecture. He dated my sister Brooke for 2 years, made her sign something before they got engaged. Then he cheated on her with some woman from his gym." My stomach dropped. "When was this?" "Last year. Brooke got nothing when they split. He kept her grandmother's ring, her car payments, everything. She's still paying off their joint credit cards." I grabbed a pen. "Can you give me your sister's number?" Within an hour, I was sitting across from Brooke at a coffee shop downtown. She was 26, worked as a kindergarten teacher, and looked like she hadn't slept in months. "I knew something was off about that prenup," she said, stirring her latte absently. "But Garrett kept saying it was normal, that all successful couples did it." She pulled out a manila folder. I saved everything. The papers, the emails, even recordings of our fights about it. The prenup was nearly identical to mine. Same 47 pages, same one-sided terms. But this one had been prepared by a different lawyer. Garrett's signature was at the bottom, along with Brooke's. "Who was the other woman?" I asked. Brooke's face darkened. "Some fitness instructor named Tasha. Garrett was paying for her personal training sessions while we were engaged, 45 minutes twice a week for 6 months. I did the math. That overlapped with when Garrett started dating me." "Brooke, I need to ask you something important. Did Garrett ever mention his business partner giving him advice about prenups?" She nodded slowly. "All the time. He said his partner, some guy named Rick, told all the guys at his firm to protect themselves, that women these days were just after money." Red flag number 3, and I was just getting started. I called Patricia that afternoon. "We need to dig deeper. I think Garrett's been running this scam for years." "How deep are we talking?" Patricia asked. "However deep it goes." Patricia hired a private investigator named Tony Castellanos, former police detective specialized in financial fraud. Within a week, he'd found 2 more victims. Rachel, a nurse from Portland, dated Garrett for 18 months, signed a prenup, caught him cheating with a coworker, lost her savings, her condo, and her faith in relationships. And Kiara, a graphic designer from Seattle. Same story, different year, prenup, cheating, financial devastation. Tony spread the documents across my kitchen table, the same table where Garrett had first shown me his prenup. Here's the pattern, Tony said, pointing to highlighted sections. Each prenup is nearly identical. Same law firm prepared them all. Same terms, same loopholes. And look at this. He showed me a bank statement. Garrett's been receiving payments from something called Pembroke Investment Holdings. $50,000 deposited 6 months after each breakup. My blood ran cold. Who owns Pembroke Investment Holdings? Still working on that. But I've got a feeling we're going to find some very interesting names. Tony's hunch was right. Pembroke Investment Holdings was a shell company owned by Richard Costas, Garrett's business partner. The same Rick who'd supposedly been giving Garrett advice about protecting himself, but it got worse. Tony found contracts between Garrett and Rick dating back 5 years. Garrett wasn't just scamming women for money, he was being paid to do it. The contracts were detailed, systematic. Garrett would target successful women with significant assets, date them for 12-18 months, propose with a prenup designed to strip them of everything, cheat to force a breakup, then collect his fee from Rick. It's like a perverted business model, Patricia said when I showed her the evidence. Emotional fraud as a revenue stream. I stared at the contracts feeling sick. How many women? Tony consulted his notes. We've confirmed 7 victims over 5 years, but there might be more. 7 women, 7 lives disrupted, 7 hearts broken for profit. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Brooke's hollow eyes, Rachel's trembling hands, Kiara's defensive posture when she talked about trust. Garrett hadn't just cheated on me. He'd made destroying women's lives his career. The next morning, I called Patricia. I want to sue Rick too, and I want to find every victim. That's going to be expensive, Patricia warned. And complicated. I don't care. Use whatever you need from the settlement money. We set up a hotline. Patricia posted a carefully worded notice in the legal section of 3 major newspapers. Were you asked to sign a prenuptial agreement by architect Garrett Pembroke? Contact us regarding your legal rights. The calls started immediately. Victim number 8. Diana, a veterinarian from Austin. She'd been smart enough to refuse the prenup, so Garrett had simply disappeared one day. Blocked her number, moved out of their shared apartment, left her with a lease she couldn't afford alone. Victim number 9. Naomi, a software engineer from Denver. She'd signed the prenup but discovered Garrett's cheating before the wedding. When she tried to break the engagement, he sued her for the cost of the wedding deposits, $23,000. By the end of the first week, we had 12 confirmed victims. Tony found more contracts in Rick's files. The business had been expanding. Rick was recruiting other men, teaching them Garrett's system. They'd been planning to franchise the operation. It's like a pyramid scheme, Tony explained. But instead of selling products, they're selling heartbreak. I called an emergency meeting with Patricia and Tony. We need to stop this now before they hurt anyone else. Patricia leaned back in her chair. What are you thinking? Class action lawsuit against both of them, and we go public with everything. That's a big risk, Patricia said. We'd be painting a target on your back. I thought about Brooke, still paying off Garrett's credit card bills. About Rachel, who'd moved back in with her parents because she couldn't afford rent. About Naomi, who'd told me she hadn't dated anyone in 2 years because she was terrified of being fooled again. Some things are worth the risk. Patricia filed the class action suit on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it was front-page news. Local architect accused of operating romance scam, read the headline in the Tribune. The article detailed the contracts, the shell company, the systematic destruction of women's lives for profit. Garrett's photo was right there on the front page, looking smug in his architect headshot, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. The story went viral. By Friday afternoon, 3 more women had called our hotline. By Monday, we had 17 victims total. The Today Show wanted an interview. So did 60 Minutes, Dateline, and every major news outlet. Patricia advised against it, but I said yes to the Today Show. The more people who know about this, the better, I told her. Maybe we can prevent it from happening to someone else. The interview aired on a Wednesday morning. I sat across from the host, calm and collected, while they played excerpts from the secret recordings Tony had found in Rick's office. The key is making them think it's their idea, Garrett's voice said clearly through the studio speakers. You plant the seed about protecting assets, then act reluctant when they suggest the prenup. The host looked disgusted. And this was a business for them? A very profitable one, I replied. Rick was paying Garrett $50,000 per victim. They'd identified it as an untapped market. Successful women with assets and trusting hearts. The interview segment was 12 minutes long. By the time it ended, our hotline had logged 43 calls. Not all of them were from victims. Some were from lawyers offering to help pro bono. Others were from journalists wanting to investigate similar schemes in their cities. But 3 calls stood out. The first was from Garrett's mother. I had no idea, she said, her voice shaking. I'm so sorry for what my son did to you. To all of you. The second was from Rick's ex-wife. I always wondered where that money was coming from, she said. Rick told me it was investment returns, but the timing never made sense. The third call made my blood freeze. I think they might have killed my daughter. The woman's name was Dorothy Brennan. Her daughter, Melissa, had been found dead in her apartment 6 months earlier. Apparent suicide. Single gunshot wound to the head. Melissa had been dating someone named Garrett, Dorothy said. She was supposed to marry him, but something went wrong. She became very depressed, stopped eating, stopped returning my calls. I gripped the phone. Mrs. Brennan, did Melissa ever mention a prenup? That's all she talked about in her last few months. How this prenup was going to ruin her financially. She'd inherited money from her father, about $2 million. She was terrified of losing it. Patricia and I drove to Dorothy's house that same day. She lived in a modest ranch in the suburbs, surrounded by photos of her daughter. Melissa had been beautiful. Dark hair, bright smile, looked like she'd never hurt anyone in her life. She was a social worker, Dorothy explained. Worked with foster children. The inheritance was supposed to help her open her own agency. Dorothy handed me a manila envelope. I found these in Melissa's things after she died. I didn't understand what they meant. Inside were copies of emails between Melissa and Garrett, the usual love-bombing pattern, followed by pressure about the prenup. But these emails had a different tone. More aggressive. More threatening. "If you can't trust me enough to sign this," one email read, "then maybe we're not right for each other. Maybe you're just like every other gold digger I've dated." Another email was worse. "I've been talking to my lawyer. Apparently, if someone dies before a wedding, the surviving partner can claim emotional damages from the estate. Just something to think about." I felt sick reading it. Dorothy was crying quietly. The police said it was suicide, that she was depressed about her relationship. But Melissa wasn't suicidal. She was the strongest person I knew. I handed the emails to Patricia. "Can we reopen the investigation?" "We can try," Patricia said. "But it's going to be difficult. The death was ruled a suicide. We'd need compelling evidence to get it reopened." Tony went to work immediately. He reviewed the police reports, interviewed Melissa's friends, and examined the crime scene photos. What he found was disturbing. Melissa had supposedly shot herself with her left hand, but according to her medical records, she was right-handed and had limited mobility in her left hand due to a childhood injury. The gun was registered to Garrett, and security cameras at Melissa's apartment complex showed Garrett's car in the parking lot the night she died. But the police had missed all of this because they'd assumed it was suicide from the start. Tony brought his findings to the detective who'd handled the original case. Detective Morrison was a veteran cop, close to retirement, who didn't appreciate being told he'd missed evidence. "Look, I understand you want closure," Morrison said, "but sometimes people just reach their breaking point. The girl was depressed about her relationship. It happens." "Did you know the gun was registered to her boyfriend?" Tony asked. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "That's not unusual. Couples share firearms all the time. Did you know she was left-handed?" "What does that matter?" Tony spread the crime scene photos across Morrison's desk. "She supposedly shot herself with her left hand. But look at these medical records. She had nerve damage in her left hand from a childhood accident. Couldn't even write with it." Morrison studied the photos for a long moment. His face grew pale. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "How did we miss this?" Within a week, the police had reopened Melissa's case as a homicide investigation. Garrett was arrested on a Thursday morning at the Home Depot where he'd been working. The arrest was captured by news cameras. Garrett in his orange apron, looking confused and terrified as officers read him his rights. Rick was arrested the same day at his architectural firm. They seized computers, files, and bank records. The evidence of their scheme was overwhelming. But the murder charge against Garrett was what really captured public attention. The story was now national news. A handsome architect who seduced successful women, stole their money, and possibly killed one when she threatened to expose him. People magazine put Melissa's photo on their cover, "The Woman Who Died for Love." The trial started 6 months later. I testified about the prenup scam, the systematic fraud, the contracts between Garrett and Rick. 12 other women told their stories. Dorothy Brennan wept as she described finding her daughter's body. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Garrett Pembroke was a predator who had escalated from financial fraud to murder when one of his victims became a threat. Garrett's defense was pathetic. His lawyer argued that the prenups were legal, that the relationships were consensual, that Melissa's death was still suicide despite the evidence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on 17 counts of fraud. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Garrett was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rick got 15 years for his role in the fraud scheme. The civil lawsuit resulted in a $12 million judgment against both men and their assets. Every victim received compensation, with Melissa's estate getting the largest share, but money couldn't undo the damage. Brooke still flinches when men approach her. Rachel moved across the country and changed her name. Naomi started a support group for women who've been victims of romance scams. I kept Melissa's photo on my desk throughout the trial. A reminder that this was about more than money or justice. It was about a young woman who'd wanted to help foster children and instead became a victim herself. 2 years later, I got a call from Dorothy Brennan. "I wanted to let you know," she said. "I've started a foundation in Melissa's name for foster children who age out of the system. It's funded by her inheritance, the money Garrett tried to steal." "That's beautiful," I said. "Melissa would be proud." "I also wanted to thank you," Dorothy continued. "If you hadn't stood up to him, if you hadn't fought back, he might have killed other women. You saved lives." I thought about that conversation for a long time after we hung up. 6 months later, Patricia called with news. "Remember the Today Show interview you did?" she asked. "Of course. It's been used as evidence in 17 other cases across the country. Apparently, Garrett and Rick's scheme inspired copycats. But your interview helped law enforcement identify the patterns." I sat down heavily. 17 more cases, 17 more prosecutions, all successful, and every one of them referenced your testimony as a key piece of evidence. The ripple effects continued. A year later, Congress passed the Melissa Brennan Act, requiring background checks for anyone requesting information from inheritance databases. It closed a loophole that predators like Garrett had been using to identify wealthy targets. 3 years after the trial, I got married. His name is David, he's a teacher, and he refused to even discuss a prenup. "I trust you completely," he said when I brought it up. "If you want to protect your assets, that's your choice. But I'm not asking you to sign away your rights." Our wedding was small, intimate, and filled with people who genuinely cared about us. Brooke was there. So was Rachel. Naomi gave a toast about finding love after betrayal. Dorothy Brennan attended as well. She gave me a locket with Melissa's photo inside. "Melissa believed in justice," she told me. "You made sure she got it." 5 years later, the Melissa Brennan Foundation has helped over 300 foster children transition to independent living. The foundation's logo is a phoenix rising from ashes, Melissa's favorite symbol. Garrett is serving his life sentence at a maximum security prison in California. He appeals his conviction every year. Every year, the appeals are denied. Rick was released after serving 12 years of his 15-year sentence. He works at a gas station now, prohibited from practicing architecture or working in finance. His ex-wife remarried and moved to another state. I sometimes wonder if there are other women out there, victims we never found, stories we never heard. Tony estimates we uncovered maybe 60% of Garrett's crimes, but I sleep well knowing that Garrett will never hurt another woman. The house I bought with the settlement money is beautiful. 3 bedrooms, a garden, and a home office where I work as a victim's advocate. I help women navigate the legal system after financial abuse, and I testify in cases involving romance scams. Last week, a young woman named Zoe called my hotline. Her boyfriend was pressuring her to sign a prenup, making her feel guilty for hesitating, telling her it was standard practice. "I keep thinking about your story," she told me, the one from the Today Show, and I realized his prenup sounds exactly like the one you described. I drove to meet Zoe that same day. Her prenup was virtually identical to the one Garrett had given me, down to the specific language about gift reversion. We called Patricia. It turns out Zoe's boyfriend had attended one of Rick's seminars before Rick was arrested. He'd been using Garrett's exact playbook, word for word. Zoe broke up with him the next day. She kept the ring, which, according to the law, was a gift she was entitled to keep. She sold the ring and used the money to start law school. "I want to help other women like you helped me," she told me. The cycle continues. Women helping women, refusing to let predators operate in shadows, demanding accountability for those who would exploit trust for profit. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I just signed Garrett's original prenup. If I trusted his assurances, ignored my instincts, prioritized keeping the peace over protecting myself. Melissa might still be alive. 17 other women might not have been victimized by copycat schemes. The Melissa Brennan Act might never have been passed. One woman's refusal to be silenced can change everything. Patricia retired last year, but she still takes my calls. "You know," she told me recently, "in 30 years of practicing law, your case was the most satisfying victory I ever had." "Why?" I asked. "Because it proved that predators can be stopped, that systematic abuse can be exposed, that one person's courage can protect countless others." I keep Melissa's photo on my desk at home, next to a picture from my wedding day. Both women remind me of something important. Love should make you stronger, not more vulnerable. It should add to your life, not subtract from it. And if someone asks you to sign away your rights for love, they're not offering love at all. They're offering a transaction, and you deserve so much more than that. The foundation sends me updates about the foster children they've helped. There's Marcus, who's now studying to be a social worker, and Priya, who started her own nonprofit for at-risk youth, and dozens of others who are building lives that Melissa would be proud of. Her legacy isn't the tragedy of how she died. It's the lives that continue because of how she lived, and how we all fought to honor her memory with action. Every year on the anniversary of Melissa's death, Dorothy and I visit her grave. We bring flowers and updates about the foundation. We tell her about the women who've been helped, the laws that have been changed, the predators who've been stopped. This year, we also brought news that another state had passed legislation inspired by the Melissa Brennan Act. "She's still saving people," Dorothy said, placing a bouquet of white lilies on the headstone. As we walked back to the car, Dorothy turned to me. "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "All the women Garrett would have hurt if you hadn't fought back. All the Melissas who are still alive because you refused to be a victim." I thought about Zoe, now halfway through law school, about Brooke, who's finally dating again, about the 17 copycat schemes that were shut down because investigators knew what to look for, about the women whose names I'll never know, who heard the story and trusted their instincts when something felt wrong. That's the real victory. Not the money or the prison sentences or the news coverage. It's the women who are safe because one woman decided to read the fine print, because one woman refused to sign away her rights for love, because one woman proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a predator is simply refuse to be quiet. Garrett thought he was so clever, bearing that adultery clause where he assumed I'd never notice it. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was especially wrong about assuming that love makes women stupid. Love makes women strong. It makes them protective. It makes them willing to fight for what's right, even when the cost is high. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, love makes women angry enough to change the world. The settlement money is long gone now, donated to the foundation or spent on legal fees for other victims, but I've never regretted a penny of it. After all, what good is money if you don't use it to make sure other people don't suffer the way you did? David and I are trying to have children now, and when I think about the world I want to bring them into, I'm glad it's a world where predators like Garrett are behind bars, where women like Melissa are remembered and honored, where love is measured not by what you're willing to sacrifice, but by what you're willing to protect. That's the world Patricia's fine print helped create, and that's worth more than any prenup ever could be. I was the black sheep who wasted my life traveling, until my travel blog made more than all their corporate salaries combined. For 18 years, family dinners were performances where I played the disappointment. Dad would carve the roast while announcing my brother Maximiliano's latest promotion. Regional director at 28, he'd beam, knife slicing through meat like my self-esteem. Mom would pass the potatoes with that look, part pity, part embarrassment. Evangeline's exploring again, she'd explain to relatives, as if wandering through Patagonian villages was some kind of mental illness. My sister Persephone perfected the art of sympathetic concern. It's wonderful that you're following your passion, she'd say, voice dripping with condescension. But don't you want stability eventually? Uncle Thaddeus was more direct. You're 31 years old. Time to stop playing dress-up in foreign countries and get serious about your future. They had their lives mapped out. Mortgage payments, retirement plans, annual performance reviews. I had a blog called Wandering Souls that I updated from internet cafes in remote corners of the world. While they climbed corporate hierarchies, I climbed actual mountains, documenting indigenous communities before modernization erased them forever. This hobby of yours, Dad would sigh during video calls from my latest destination. When does it become a career? It already is, I'd reply, but they never listened. Last Christmas, everything changed. I flew home from 3 months in remote villages of Myanmar, exhausted but carrying news that would rewrite every family dinner conversation for the rest of our lives. The usual suspects gathered around Mom's perfectly set table. Maximiliano announced his corner office upgrade. Persephone showed off her new diamond earrings, a bonus for closing some corporate deal. Then all eyes turned to me, the eternal question mark in designer clothes. Any job prospects? Uncle Thaddeus asked, already knowing the answer would disappoint him. I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling slightly as I opened the email I'd been saving for this exact moment. Actually, I got some interesting news while I was away, I said, voice steady despite my racing heart. Persephone smirked. Let me guess, another travel opportunity? Penguin Random House wants to publish my travel memoirs, I said quietly. They're offering $1.2 million for a 3-book deal. The silence that followed was deafening. Maximiliano's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. That's impossible, Dad whispered. I scrolled to my bank app, showing them the advance payment that had cleared yesterday. The documentary rights sold to HBO for another $800,000. Uncle Thaddeus leaned forward, squinting at my screen like it might be fake. How many people read this blog of yours? 3.7 million subscribers, I said. Monthly revenue averages $45,000 from sponsorships alone. The revelation hit like an avalanche. My hobby had quietly become an empire while they were busy pitying my unconventional choices. Persephone pulled out her own phone, frantically Googling my blog name. Her face went progressively paler as the numbers loaded. Jesus, she breathed. You make more in a month than I do all year. But then Dad's expression shifted from shock to something darker, fear. Evangeline, he said, voice barely audible, there's something we need to discuss about your travels. Something dangerous you've stumbled into. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom set down her wine glass with shaking hands. Uncle Thaddeus suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. What are you talking about? I asked, though something cold was already settling in my stomach. Dad glanced around the table, then back at me. Not here. We need privacy. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of everyone, I said firmly. I'm done with family secrets. He ran a hand through his graying hair. The Myanmar trip. You mentioned visiting villages near the Thai border. Remote places. My blood froze. Those villages had been off most tourist maps. I'd only found them through local guides who'd sworn me to secrecy about their locations. How do you know about that? I whispered. Because we've been tracking your movements for years, Mom said quietly, her voice breaking. We had to, for your safety. The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Maximiliano and Persephone looked as shocked as I felt. Tracking me? I repeated, my success suddenly feeling hollow. You've been spying on your own daughter? It's not what you think, Dad said desperately. We weren't trying to control you. We were trying to protect you. From what? Uncle Thaddeus cleared his throat. From the same people who killed your grandfather. My world tilted. Grandfather had died when I was 12. Heart attack, they'd told me. Sudden and unexpected. Grandfather died of natural causes, I said slowly. No, Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. He was murdered because he got too close to something he shouldn't have seen. Dad stood up, pacing to the window. Your grandfather wasn't just a businessman, Evangeline. He was a whistleblower. He'd discovered a human trafficking network operating through remote villages across Southeast Asia. He was documenting it, preparing to expose everything. The room spun. That's impossible. Grandfather sold insurance. That was his cover, Uncle Thaddeus said grimly. He worked with international law enforcement using his business travels to investigate suspicious activities in isolated communities. And you think I've somehow... I couldn't finish the sentence. Your blog posts, Persephone said suddenly, pulling up my website on her phone. You've been to 17 of the 23 villages grandfather identified as trafficking hubs. My hands went numb. I've been following humanitarian leads, places where traditional ways of life were being disrupted. I thought I was documenting cultural preservation. You were, Dad said, but you were also documenting evidence of modern slavery without realizing it. Mom pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before. Inside were printouts of my blog posts, my photos, annotated with notes and handwriting I didn't recognize. 3 weeks after you posted about the village of Kalau in Myanmar, authorities raided it and found 47 victims of human trafficking, she said. Your documentation of unusual security measures and restricted areas helped them build the case. I stared at the papers. Photos I'd taken of what I thought were traditional buildings were circled in red ink. My notes about community helpers who seemed nervous around outsiders were highlighted. That's good, right? I said weakly. If my work helped save people, it is good, Uncle Thaddeus said. But it's also made you a target. The same network that killed your grandfather knows you're connecting the dots. Dad returned to his seat, looking older than I'd ever seen him. We've had private security monitoring your movements for 6 years. Every time you posted about a new location, we'd alert the appropriate authorities. You've helped shut down 11 trafficking operations across 4 countries. Without knowing it, I breathed. We wanted to tell you, Mom said desperately, but we knew you'd insist on getting more involved. You'd put yourself in direct danger. So instead, you let me think you were ashamed of me? The silence that followed was deafening. We were protecting you the only way we knew how, Dad said finally, by keeping you ignorant of how important your work really was. I stood up so fast my chair fell backward. You let me feel like a failure for 18 years to protect me from something I didn't even know existed? We thought if we could just guide you away from the most dangerous areas? Mom's voice trailed off. Is that why you always pushed so hard for me to get a real job? I asked. Why you made me feel worthless for following my passion? We hoped you'd choose something safer, Dad admitted. We never imagined your blog would become so influential, or that you'd inadvertently become one of the most effective anti-trafficking investigators in the world. The irony was staggering. While my family criticized my choices, I'd been accidentally doing exactly what my grandfather had died trying to accomplish. There's more, Uncle Thaddeus said grimly. Yesterday, we received intelligence that suggests they've identified you. Your real name, your family connections, everything. My blood turned to ice. What kind of intelligence? Dad pulled out his phone, showing me a photo that made my knees buckle. It was me, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, walking through the village in Myanmar where I'd spent my last week. This was uploaded to a dark web forum 3 days ago, he said, along with your home address, your family members' names, and a bounty. A bounty? Persephone whispered. $50,000 for information leading to your location, Uncle Thaddeus said. $200,000 for permanent resolution of the problem. The weight of everything crashed down on me. My success, my vindication, my moment of triumph, all of it was built on a foundation of lies and danger I'd never seen coming. So what now? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Do I stop traveling? Stop blogging? Let them win? We've been preparing for this possibility, Dad said. There's a safe house in Colorado, remote, secure. You could continue your work from there. Focus on writing your books. Hiding, I said flatly. Surviving, Mom corrected, until law enforcement can take down the rest of the network. I looked around the table at these people who'd let me believe I was a disappointment while secretly orchestrating my protection. The betrayal and gratitude warred in my chest. How long have you known this day would come? I asked. Since you posted your first blog entry from Cambodia 7 years ago, Uncle Thaddeus admitted. You described a village that matched one of your grandfather's investigations perfectly. We knew then that somehow you'd inherited his instinct for finding these places. And you never thought to just tell me? We consulted with FBI behavioral specialists, Dad said. They said telling you would likely make you more reckless, not less, that you'd feel obligated to deliberately seek out dangerous situations. He wasn't wrong. Even now, knowing the truth, part of me wanted to book the next flight back to Southeast Asia and start investigating properly. There's something else, Mom said quietly. She pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. We've been documenting everything. Your grandfather's investigation, your accidental discoveries, the raids that followed. We've built a case that could take down the entire network. We? I asked. Your father has been working with international law enforcement for 12 years, Uncle Thaddeus said. Ever since your grandfather was killed. Everything we've done, every move we've made has been building toward this moment. The room spun again. Dad's not really in insurance either? I am, he said, but I'm also a consultant for Interpol. Have been since you were in college. Jesus, Maximiliano breathed. Our whole family is living a lie. Not a lie, Mom said firmly. A cover. We've been protecting not just Evangeline, but all of you. These people don't hesitate to target families. I sank back into my chair, mind reeling. So my blog, my success, my whole career, it's all been part of some undercover operation? No, Dad said emphatically. Your talent, your writing, your ability to connect with people, that's all you. We never influenced your content or directed your travels. We just monitored the aftermath. And occasionally tipped off authorities when your posts revealed something significant, Uncle Thaddeus added. I thought about all the remote villages I'd visited, all the stories I'd told. How many lives had been saved because of photos I'd taken without understanding their significance? How many victims had been freed because I'd documented the wrong thing at the right time? The Myanmar trip, I said slowly. Something happened there. Something that made this urgent. Dad nodded grimly. You photographed a man who's been on Interpol's most wanted list for 8 years, posted his face to 3.7 million followers without realizing who he was. My mouth went dry. The village elder who showed me around? Tong Sain, also known as the Ghost of the Golden Triangle. He runs the largest human trafficking operation in Southeast Asia. I remembered the man. Friendly, articulate, spoke perfect English. He'd insisted on personally guiding me through the village, even posed for photos with some of the children. He seemed so normal, I whispered. The best predators always do, Mom said. But your blog post led to his identification and arrest. He was captured 2 days ago, which is why they're coming for you now, Uncle Thaddeus added. You've cost them their leader and millions in revenue. The magnitude of it all overwhelmed me. While I'd been proudly announcing my book deal, dangerous people were planning my murder. What happens to my blog? I asked. My followers? We've prepared a statement, Dad said. You're taking a temporary hiatus for a family emergency. Your content will remain online, but you'll stop posting new material until the network is dismantled. How long will that take? Could be months, could be years. I stared at my phone, at the app that had connected me to millions of people around the world. My entire identity was wrapped up in sharing stories, in bringing hidden corners of the world to light. There is another option, Uncle Thaddeus said carefully. I'm listening. You could work with us officially. Use your platform to help authorities target remaining cells. Your followers trust you. They'd believe anything you posted. You mean become bait. I mean become a partner, Dad corrected. Help us finish what your grandfather started. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. Instead of accidentally stumbling onto trafficking operations, I could deliberately hunt them down. It would be incredibly dangerous, Mom said, reading my expression. These people have already killed for less. But think about the impact, Persephone said suddenly. We all turned to look at her. Evangeline, you have 3.7 million followers. If you could direct their attention to specific issues, specific locations, crowdsourced investigation, Maximiliano added, catching on, your audience could help identify suspicious activities, provide tips. Absolutely not, Dad said firmly. We're not putting civilians at risk. We wouldn't have to, I said, my mind racing. I could frame it as cultural documentation. Ask followers to help identify traditional practices that seem out of place, buildings that don't match local architecture, communities where photography is restricted. People love participating in mysteries, Persephone said excitedly. You could gamify it. Make it feel like a treasure hunt instead of an investigation. Uncle Thaddeus was nodding slowly. It could work. Use the blog as a front for intelligence gathering. No, Mom said desperately. It's too dangerous. If they realize what she's doing, they already know what I'm doing, I pointed out. At least this way, I'd be doing it on purpose. Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at the photos spread across the table. Finally, he looked up at me. If you do this, there's no going back. Your life as you know it would be over. You'd always be looking over your shoulder. I've been looking over my shoulder for 6 years without knowing it, I said. At least now I'd know why. And if something happens to you? I thought about the children in those villages, the young women who'd looked at me with haunted eyes while their captors smiled and posed for pictures. Then I'll have died trying to finish what grandfather started. The decision crystallized in that moment. I'd spent my entire adult life feeling like a disappointment, like my choices were selfish and meaningless. Now I knew the truth. I'd been making a difference all along, just not the way I'd imagined. I'll need training, I said. Real training. If I'm going to do this properly, I need to know what to look for, how to document evidence, how to stay safe. That can be arranged, Uncle Thaddeus said. There's a facility in Virginia where they train deep cover operatives. And my blog? We'll help you develop new content strategies, Dad said. Posts that appear to be cultural documentation, but actually serve investigative purposes. My audience will notice if my writing style changes dramatically. So we'll transition gradually, Persephone suggested. Start with posts about historical mysteries, unsolved disappearances. Get your followers used to participating in investigations. I looked around the table at my family, my complicated, secretive, protective family who'd let me hate them to keep me safe. One condition, I said. Name it, Dad replied. No more lies. If I'm doing this, we do it as a team. Complete transparency from now on. Mom started crying again. You could have a normal life. You could settle down, be safe. I could. I agreed. But I won't. Not when I know what's out there. Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your grandfather would be proud. I hope so. Uncle Thaddeus was already making phone calls, arranging meetings with people whose names I couldn't catch. Maximiliano and Persephone were looking at me with expressions I'd never seen before. Respect. Maybe even admiration. There's one more thing, Dad said as the evening wound down. The publishing deal? The HBO contract? You'll need to be careful about how you handle that money. Why? Sudden wealth makes you a target in new ways. And if you're working with law enforcement, your finances will be scrutinized. Are you suggesting I turn down the deals? I'm suggesting you be strategic about them. Maybe structure the payments differently, funnel some of the money toward anti-trafficking organizations. The irony wasn't lost on me. My success story was becoming something completely different from what I'd imagined when I walked into dinner tonight. When do we start? I asked. The training program begins next month, Uncle Thaddeus said, hanging up his phone. But first we need to get you somewhere safe. The safe house in Colorado? For now, until we can assess the immediate threat level. I thought about my apartment in Portland, my plants, my cat Hemingway, my normal life that apparently hadn't been normal at all. How long do I have to pack? We leave tonight, Dad said. A team is already at your apartment securing your essential belongings. Hemingway? Already en route to Colorado, Mom said with a small smile. We know how much you love that cat. Despite everything, I laughed. Even in their deception, they'd known me well enough to prioritize my pet's safety. So what now? I asked. Do I just disappear? My followers will want to know what happened. We've prepared a statement, Persephone said, pulling out her phone. Family medical emergency requiring extended leave. You'll post it tomorrow morning from the safe house. I read the draft she showed me. It was perfect. Vague enough to avoid questions, specific enough to seem genuine. And after that, After that, you become the most dangerous travel blogger in the world, Uncle Thaddeus said, with something that might have been pride. You just won't advertise that fact. As we cleared the dinner table, I felt the weight of my old life lifting away. The family dynamics that had defined us for so long were shifting into something new, something honest. I'm sorry, Dad said quietly as we loaded the dishwasher, for letting you think we were disappointed. I'm sorry too, I replied, for thinking you didn't understand. We understood better than you knew, Mom said, joining us. We just couldn't tell you why. Later that night, as I packed my emergency bag one more time, I thought about all the places I'd been, all the stories I'd told. In a few hours, I'd be starting a new chapter. One where my wandering would have a purpose I'd never imagined. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Looking forward to working with you. Your grandfather would be proud. Agent Morrison. I smiled and typed back, ready when you are. 3 months later, I was in a compound in Virginia, learning how to spot surveillance, identify trafficking indicators, and document evidence without appearing suspicious. My fellow trainees were career law enforcement officers, military veterans, intelligence analysts. I was the only travel blogger in the group. Your cover is actually perfect, Agent Morrison told me during our first one-on-one session. Journalists and bloggers have legitimate reasons to ask questions, take photos, visit remote locations. You'll be able to go places our traditional operatives can't. What makes you think I can handle this? Because you've already been handling it for 7 years, she said. You just didn't know it. The training was grueling. Physical fitness, defensive tactics, surveillance techniques, cultural intelligence, emergency medical training. But the most challenging part was learning to see the world differently. Human trafficking hides in plain sight, my instructor explained as we reviewed case studies. Victims are often displayed as willing participants. Communities are often complicit, either through fear or economic dependence. I thought about all the villages I'd visited, all the smiling faces that had welcomed me. How many of those smiles had been forced? How many of those communities had been built on suffering I'd been too naive to recognize? The key is learning to trust your instincts, Agent Morrison said. You've already proven you have them. Now we're just going to sharpen them. By the end of the 3-month program, I could identify potential trafficking situations from subtle behavioral cues, document evidence using covert photography techniques, and communicate with law enforcement using coded language that would seem innocent to casual observers. Your new blog strategy, Agent Morrison explained during our final briefing, will focus on responsible tourism. You'll be educating your followers about how to travel ethically, how to recognize and report suspicious activities, how to ensure their tourism dollars aren't supporting harmful practices. And in the process, you'll be building the world's largest crowdsourced anti-trafficking network. The first post in my new series went live 6 months after that Christmas dinner that changed everything. Traveling with purpose, how to ensure your adventures make a positive impact. The response was overwhelming. My followers were eager to learn, eager to help, eager to be part of something meaningful. Within weeks, I was receiving dozens of tips from travelers who'd spotted suspicious activities in various locations. This is incredible, Dad said during one of our weekly check-ins. You've essentially deputized 3.7 million people. 4.2 million, I corrected. The subscriber count keeps growing. My book tour became a recruitment tool. At every reading, every interview, I'd talk about responsible travel and encourage people to be aware of their surroundings. I never mentioned trafficking directly, but the message was clear. 1 year after my training, I received a message that made everything worthwhile. Thanks to a tip from one of your followers, we were able to rescue 43 victims from a trafficking operation in Cambodia. Your work is saving lives. Agent Morrison, my family had been right about one thing. My life would never be normal again. But it was better than normal. It was meaningful in ways I'd never imagined possible. The irony of it all still amazed me. For years, they'd made me feel like my choices were selfish and frivolous. Now, those same choices were the foundation of one of the most effective anti-trafficking operations in the world. I have a confession, Mom said during our most recent family dinner. I've been reading your blog religiously for 7 years. I know, I said. You've been subscribed since day one. Username, ProudMom47. She looked shocked. You knew. I've always known. You liked every single post within minutes of publication, even the ones about remote villages with terrible internet connections. We've all been following along, Maximiliano admitted, even when we were pretending to disapprove, especially then, Persephone added. We were so proud of you, but we couldn't show it. Dad cleared his throat. Speaking of confessions, there's something else you should know. My stomach dropped. After everything we'd been through, I wasn't sure I could handle another family secret. What now? The publishing deal, the HBO contract, we might have had some influence there. What kind of influence? The kind where your father knows people in the entertainment industry through his law enforcement contacts, Uncle Thaddeus said carefully. I stared at them. You're telling me my success was orchestrated? Not orchestrated, Dad said quickly. Facilitated. Your work was already exceptional. We just made sure the right people saw it. The blog's success was all you, Mom added. We never interfered with that. But when opportunities arose to amplify your platform, you pushed things along. We helped, Persephone corrected, because we believed in you, even when you thought we didn't. I should have been angry. Another deception, another manipulation, but instead I felt something else. Gratitude. Thank you, I said quietly. For lying to you again? Dad asked, confused. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. As I looked around the table at my complicated, protective, secretive family, I realized that everything had worked out exactly as it was supposed to. My wandering had led me home, not to a place, but to a purpose. My phone buzzed with another message from Agent Morrison. New intelligence suggests a major operation in northern Thailand. Interested in planning a cultural documentation trip? I smiled and typed back, always. Because that's what I did now. I wandered with purpose, documenting cultures and saving lives, one blog post at a time. And for the first time in my life, my family was proud to tell people exactly what I did for a living, even if they couldn't tell them why.